Hello and welcome to this video, which is just going to be like a Redux clarification on the build that I did that I called the meta build. So a few things that I really want to clarify because there are a few mistakes in that video, and the first one has to do with what I said about the bosses. So first, the build. The build is basically a combination of Heartland's Conqueror together with Turok's Pact. And the idea is to buff the weakening glyph. And what I did say in the video was that what's also done was import the bosses from the normal dungeons and their weapon and spell damage values. That is not exactly true. That is actually not what SOS has done. What SOS did is that they treat the Endless Archive as a normal instance, and you will see this if you look at what the ads are called, and for example ESL logs and so on. They're usually called normal and then etc add. So we've by now figured out what the weapon and spell damage is of the bosses, and it's based not on arcs but on cycles, and that's kind of where it gets problematic, because then the weapon and spell damage doesn't scale with how far you get. So in cycle 1, every boss is going to have 2390 weapon and spell damage. That includes the Marauders, and it includes the boss that is in the sort of the third round of each cycle. Then in cycle 2, it's going to be 2590. Then in cycle 3, it's going to be 2790. Cycle 4, 2990. And in cycle 5, which is the third cycle, it's 3125. So it doesn't matter if it's a Marauder in that cycle or if it's the boss. What sort of can we achieve with our weakening enchantment? Well, the maximum weakening enchantment you can get is 2891, which means that the bosses in cycle 1, 2, and 3 can be reduced to 0 by just using the weakening enchant. This of course requires 5 attuned enchantments, which is not that easy to get. And in cycle 4 and 5, just something like Corrupted Pollen is going to take you very close to 0 as well. The thing is, of course, you're never always going to get a full amount of enchantment buffs, but even just having 2 or 3 enchantment buffs is enough to take every single boss close to doing 0 damage. And this time I have brought some proof. So one thing I want to talk about first is there was some discussion of, can you actually proc this on the boss even with the wall and so on? And what I've shown here is that I've just gone to 2 of my target dummies, and as you can see, I have more than 100% weakening uptime. Why is this? Well, that's because with Turok's Pact, the cooldown is something like 2.2 seconds, which means that, and the duration is 5 seconds, which means that you can actually keep it up on 2 targets. So that means that even though we have our wall proccing, we can still control our weakening with our light attacks. And of course, the enchant procs every time you light attack on cooldown. So that was the first thing. The second thing is that I've done a lot of I've saved a lot of passes, and what I want to show is the damage received. So this is a Arc 8 boss, and what you see here is that the damage received, this boss did a total of 12,400 damage to me in an almost 45-second fight. And if we load another fight, you will see the same thing. This is Grofthar. I think this is Arc 7. You can kind of figure it by the time that I took it. So this was 129. That was about Arc 7, 800 damage. And I've just saved an enormous amount of these receipts. And what you find is that this was only with 3 enchantment in this run, and I'm basically taking 0 damage. Even at the third, you can see that even the third shots didn't do a lot of damage to me. The one that did the most was actually the Replicram himself, and then there's the Dragon. But look at the damage from the Dragon. We're talking about hits of about 1600, and that's just because what they have on them is just weakening almost at 100% uptime. So weakening enchantment is extremely powerful. I think this Ash Titan fight is probably the funniest one. This was from a couple of days ago. I think this is Arc 6 or something, and it's only doing 130 DPS. So the weakening enchantment is incredibly powerful, and even if you don't have 5 weakening enchantment, 5 attuned enchantment visions in this archive, just having 3 is enough to reduce the damage to such a point that you feel like you're taking no damage. The other thing I want to clarify was how we built. So this is basically how I would set up this particular setup. I would use, of course, a Sorgus. I'm not going to waste 20k for this video. And then I have my superstar. What you want is, for the most part, weakening enchantment front bar. Then on your back bar, you really want dual wield, because you really want both of these enchantments. You want the hardening and you want the weapon enchantment. And this is true for 90% of the time in there. So first off, this build, you only want to run it in Arc 5 and onwards. So you want to run a real damage build till Arc 4. But the other thing that's important to say is that there is the situation that there is a Marauder in every single cycle. This Marauder shares the weapon spell damage with the bosses, which means that with our weakening enchantment, we can make these Marauders essentially do no damage. Once we've killed the Marauder, especially in their higher arcs, then there is a little trick that we can do. And that trick is to run the hardening glyph front bar. And then what we do instead is then we run the weakening enchantment on the back bar. So you imagine you run this instead of your hardening, and then you put the hardening on front bar. Why do you want to do this in later arcs? And when I say later arcs, I really mean Arc 8 and 9. Well, that's because at this point, the trash damage is very, very, very tough. And having that hardening glyph proccing a 20-30k shield every 2.2 seconds is very, very nice. But we can only do this once we've killed the Marauder, because the Marauder that is not debulked by weakened enchantment will literally one-shot you with the light attack. So if we have the luxury of getting the Marauder early in an arc, then we can start running this setup with the hardening enchant on our front bar. And it feels a lot better running that, because it's an enormously big shield on a literally no cooldown. So to those that haven't watched the original video, I'm just gonna quickly go through how to read a superstar, because I know there's also a lot of console players looking that might not be familiar with how you read this add-on. So what you have is, you have all your skills shown here. Then what it shows is your attributes, so every attribute into health. This should be our Sorgus food. Then we have our stats. This is on buff stats. Then it tells us our Mundus, which is the serpent. Then it tells every single piece. Red means heavy, green means medium, and blue means light. So we're not using blue, we're not using light armor with this build, but we're using for medium, and we're doing this to buff our stamina sustain, because that's usually what is the most rough inside the Endless Archive. Our magic sustain is fine. Then we also see the traits on every single piece, so you can see all the big pieces, heavy pieces are all reinforced. Then we have a mix of well-fitted and sturdy on the smaller pieces. Then we have our jewelry. The multi-enchantment, in fact, for this build is, of course, the Hakeju on the body, and it's actually recovery on the jewelry. So a lot of things will say multi-enchantment, unfortunately. But for this case, it's the recovery. And it's pretty important that it's recovery, because the recovery buffs inside the Endless Archive are very, very powerful. So that was basically it that I wanted to sort of make up from the last video, where I kind of screwed around and put on the wrong weapon. And I kind of want to clarify all those things. Plus, I accidentally said that the imported values from the dungeons, it's not, it's a fixed value. It's based entirely on this cycle. So the last thing I want to clarify about the video, which is where I think people misunderstood what I said, or I didn't say the things in sort of the correct way, where I said this is the only viable build. So what I meant by that was not this is the only build you could possibly play, and not even this is the only build you can possibly get to Arc 8 with. What I meant when I say viable, I mean very specifically that a build can perform on par with the meta build as this is, and there's no other build that we've found so far that can perform on par with this build, unless you're talking a DK Magma Shell build, and that was where I should have been more accurate. I think most of my core base of subscribers understood what I meant, but there is with this video I made, are a lot of new people watching, and they'll come from a different understanding of what I mean, what people mean when they say viable. So that's sort of what I want to clarify. So you can get pretty far in this archive. That's also a misunderstanding. When I say far in this archive, I mean sort of score running for the leaderboard. So for me, you go into the Endless Archive leaderboard, the top 10 within the leaderboard, I would say, is far from my understanding, but I understand that a lot of people might think, well, as long as I make it to the solo weekly leaderboard and I get my box, well, that's far. So that's where I want to apologize for being very unclear there. And when I talk about this build, I also don't talk about the very specifics of the build. So I don't talk about using this exact build, but sort of any variation within the same theme will do. So you could use something else in Redux, you could use another mythic, you could use some other enchants, but as long as you're building around focused effort and enchant buff and your sets match that, well, I would say that is within the same theme of build. So that was what I meant by it. So you might use some other sets, and that's something I want to clarify for this video as well. And that was pretty much it, and thank you for watching.